You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan Weissel.
Sam Jane.
Michael House.
Mike coming in with some very enthusiastic energy there, but you know who did come with energy and came with it? The whole interview, Kori Edmondson, USA player, a star for Maryland women's lacrosse, and you're going to get to hear a little bit about how this Terp season potentially has national championship contender written all over it. Take it away, Kori.
This week, we are joined by Maryland women's lacrosse sophomore midfielder and former #1 recruit in the country, Kori Edmondson. Thank you for joining us. We'll start it with what we just talked about in recruiting. You committed to Maryland on the first day possible. What kind of went into that, and how was that possible, and what was your mindset at the time?
Yeah, so my sister played field hockey here at the University of Maryland, so I grew up around Maryland. Living here especially kind of really helped with my process, I think, and I've also just being around the culture of the Maryland women's lacrosse team, like even just my sister through the locker room would hear her talking about how awesome that team was. And I knew from a pretty young age, I was like, that's a school for me. Like a lot of the players that played here, I looked up to for a long time in my life. And I think that's kind of what led to why Maryland, a lot of them in front of a lot of these other schools. So I really kind of got an inside look of not a lot of people get that inside look of what University of Maryland is. And I think that's what makes Maryland so special is the culture.
There's obviously so much time between when you decide you're going to go to Maryland and when you actually step on campus. What was kind of those 2 years pretty much like from when you made the decision to when you actually got on campus and, obviously trying to enjoy where you still have left of high school, but you have a lot more lacrosse in front of you?
Yeah, it's definitely hard after committing. You're like, okay, so now I have to wait 2 more years to go play at the University of Maryland, which is, it's a hard process. But definitely knowing that your time's going to come was kind of was just telling myself is that enjoy where my 2 feet are right now, because you don't get these times back. You don't get the 2 years of high school back. So not trying to overlook and being like, so what am I going to do when I step foot on at Maryland? Be I went to McDonough High School. So being where my 2 feet are, learning from Taylor Cummings was to help prepare me when I step at Maryland and be like, you know what, she prepared me the best I could. So now I can focus on Maryland and not kind of foreshadow and overlook things.
Speaking of, you said your sister played field hockey here. I saw that you were a field hockey player as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you have that 2 sport, were you being recruited for field hockey as well?
So at my sophomore year of high school, I definitely took interest of playing both field hockey and lacrosse at one point in my career. But at one point I was like, I know what, I need to focus on lacrosse, and that's kind of my main role. And I knew lacrosse was something that I enjoyed a lot more. So I wasn't necessarily recruited, but definitely looked in that role and opportunity that I think if I did pursue it, I could have. But it was just kind of sat down with my family and was like, you know what, I really love lacrosse, and that's kind of what I want to put everything into at that point.
What about what made you choose lacrosse? Was it just you were better, or what was because your sister played, so I'm assuming the family backgrounds in field hockey,
yeah.
How did you decide on lacrosse?
No, I was definitely good at field hockey as well, but I think growing up around lacrosse, my sister played lacrosse as well. We were field hockey lacrosse family. Just knowing that lacrosse was something that I always came back to. It was so you know what, I'm going to field hockey practice, but I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about lacrosse practice tomorrow. It was just something that was always on the forefront of my mind. There was no ever question of when I go to lacrosse practice, I have to go to lacrosse practice. But sometimes with field hockey, I'm like, I got to go to field hockey practice. That's kind of when I knew I needed to make the switch and be able to focus all my time on one sport going into that recruiting year, my junior year. I was like, you know what, this is what I need to lock into and not kind of get caught on the both ends of the recruiting end of because that was also the recruiting year for field hockey. So it's either I'm going to put myself in these 2 roles. And I was like, I'm going to get pulled in a lot of directions, but I really wanted to focus on putting myself in one where I know I could be successful at and go where I really wanted to go.
Do you remember your sister's reaction when you chose lacrosse? Did she kind of want you to follow in her footsteps with field hockey?
So kind of my whole life, I've tried to not follow in my sister's footsteps career. That's why I didn't go to the high school that she went to. I want to kind of put myself in my own path because she was a very successful athlete, very successful student, and she left a legacy everywhere she went. And I was like, I wanted to create a name for myself because she has left such an impact in her athletic career that I'm like, you know what? I want to be me. So she was very happy with my decision. Yeah, would she love me played field hockey? Yes, but I think she also just loves lacrosse just as much. And I think she was excited to, have that little part of something that she didn't get to have was playing lacrosse because originally she was committed to play lacrosse at Louisville. So for her, she was kind of like she got that little opportunity that she missed out on.
Would it be possible to do both? Like, you know how Dante Trader does football and then lacrosse? Like, could you do both?
Yeah, it could be a possibility, but definitely something I've like thought about for a while, but I'm like, that's not for me anymore.
Have you ever talked with Dante at all, or like have you guys ever like spoke? What does he say
Yeah,
about
so we
like the?
went to high school together.
Oh shit!
Yeah, so I like good friends with him. And he was like, it's a lot. It's a lot of taxing. I also went to high school with Julia Dorsey. She was a lacrosse player and soccer player at UNC, and those are national championship contending, like both the
Right.
sports are. And like, unfortunately, it takes so much toll on your body that you have to flip from each sport, which is really hard. Like flipping from one sport to the other, you're rolling into a preseason where you're like, your body just got done a full season of soccer. And now you're going to roll into a lacrosse where it's just as taxing on your body. And same thing with Dante going from lacrosse to football. Like it's a very different aspect. So it's like you're committing a lot and you're committing a lot of time management. And on top of that, your school. So you really never have like a down period. And like kind of just talking with, especially Julia Dorsey, like with the like girls aspect, it's just kind of, it's hard. But like she said she would never change for the world, and I give her all the credit for it.
It's something I know was definitely done at Maryland a lot back in the day, but I think every year that goes on, it gets much harder with the way that sport specific training has become.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of move to when you get to Maryland, it took you a bit to kind of get adapted on the playing field at Maryland. What do you kind of remember from the first 5 or 6 games freshman year before you kind of hit your stride?
Yeah, they were tough. Most definitely, they were rough. I think everyone goes through that though. Like the whole fall, you're kind of just like you're trying to fit in. You're trying to like figure yourself out, figure out who you are in college, and it's very different from high school. High school, like everyone's a star. You come and join a college roster where 34 people are amazing athletes, amazing lacrosse players, and you have to fit in there and you have to stand out as well. So it's kind of just like it was building confidence for myself. It was like I know and my coaches knew what I could do. That's why they kept putting me out there. They would kept putting me in these positions, but they were like, Kori, you just have to believe in yourself. Your teammates believe in you. And it's at that point, it was just myself and believing in what I could do and my abilities.
Was there any one particular moment that stood out to you as like kind of a switch that like flipped? Is there a story that you have where you kind of were like, I know the Denver game was a big game for you, but anything in practice or like anything that you remember?
I think that obviously that Denver game was kind of like was the switch for me, but I think that week leading up to Denver, like I don't know what it was, I don't know like what clicked, but everything was making sense for me. Like the plays were coming to me more more natural, more fluid. Like the stick work was there, the shooting was there for me, and it wasn't like I was tending to like overthink things before, but now I'm like you're thinking too much. Like at this point, just like let it go and like be you. Like at this point, like you have nothing to lose out there, and your coaches want to like it's okay to make mistakes. And I think that was honestly the biggest thing for me to learn was that your coaches want you to make mistakes. It's how you like see those mistakes and how you like play off of those is what the biggest thing.
And then coming in kind of to now the second year, how have you kind of seen, I guess, your impact on the team change from freshman to sophomore year? Do you think that's changed at all, or has it kind of been the same?
No, yeah, I think it most definitely has changed this year. I think, kind of having the confidence in myself a lot more, having that first year under my belt definitely helps a lot. I think I've taken on a more true midi role this year where I'm playing a lot more defense than I was last year, which I think is very different for me. So that means like my brain has to make sure I'm locked in on both sides of the field and not just one, where last year I was more kind of an offensive minded and not as much as defensive. So this year, making sure that like I know my roles and I stick to my roles. I don't go rogue and try to do things that are out of character for me. So just making sure that like I'm sticking to what I need to do, and that's like what's going to help the team be successful at the end of the day.
One big change from this year to last is a new facility. Do you remember what the team's reaction was when you guys got to see it for the first time? And kind of what are the perks of the new facility?
I think everything. I think it helps being in a spot where we all don't want to leave. Like the first time we stepped in there, we were like, we want to have a sleepover in here because this place is awesome. Like you literally never want to like leave. it takes us forever to leave. Like after practice, we're there for another 2 hours after because none of us want to leave the facility. So I think that helps just with like bonding with the team, like being able just to sit with people maybe you usually don't like you sit with like in class, like you're just in like the locker room just talking with people like all the time. I think that's not as like that wasn't as common like when we were in VTH. We were in like a little closet. We love the closet, don't get me wrong, but like being able to sit in like a couch together and just be able to like talk about whatever your day was just brings a lot more like cohesiveness with the team.
How bad was the old one, like, compared to the new one? Because I've seen it, and it was, like, there wasn't even, like, the locker room and stuff, and the team clubhouse. Isn't that what y'all had to use for practice and
Yeah,
stuff?
so
Like,
it definitely wasn't great. But we're definitely grateful for like what we had. We were able to like have a spot. We knew what was coming was going to be amazing. So it was okay to have something that wasn't this nice thing. And realistically, we didn't really need it. We didn't need the nice things. We just needed what was going to get us done and through the season to be able to play like what we had to do.
Do you have a favorite feature of the new facility?
Oh yeah, the beanbags. The beanbags are awesome. The Love Sack beanbags are awesome. We have 2 of them, and we like every time we watch film, we always sit right there to watch film in those, and they're awesome.
speaking of film, do you have a good story or anecdote at all that you could share with us just about um, your coach? I mean, Kathy Reese, obviously one of the most esteemed coaches, but off the field, like, what is she like? Is there one moment that you could tell us that kind of captures who she is?
Mhm. So I think like going back to my recruiting process, this is kind of what set Maryland aside from anywhere else. She treated me like a person, not like as an athlete, and kind of not that I was like a business transaction. Like to her, I was her second child. Like all of us on this team are her children, and I think you don't get that at a lot of other places. Like you don't get that anywhere besides here at Maryland. Like she treats us like she's one of your own, and you're more than just an athlete to her. You're a person, and for her to just like come up to me and be like, "How are you today?" Like you don't get that at a lot of other schools. You don't get to be treated as a human. A lot of these schools treat you as kind of you're just strictly as an athlete. So being able to have a coach who truly cares about who you are, what you're doing outside of lacrosse, I think is a very big aspect that I think a lot of girls now kind of get like they forget about, especially in the recruiting process. I think they're all caught up in this like look at these new facilities, like look at the coach, like how much money are they dumping? But like I think a lot of people forget like you're playing 4 years with a coach who has a lot of sway on how you do. So I think that's kind of set her aside between all of the coaches.
Another thing now with recruiting, you mentioned some of the big ones, but another thing now is obviously NIL. I believe you have a deal with Under Armour. What was the process for that, and what's that kind of been like working with them?
Yeah, that was an amazing opportunity to be able to work with Under Armour. I think also just being from Maryland kind of helps a lot. Being around Under Armour, kind of knowing like a lot of people from Under Armour, working with them, and it was kind of just like honestly through Maryland's kind of what helped me knowing knowing the right people has kind of just helped me through that. And it was like an awesome deal, and I think NIL is an awesome thing that us college athletes have been able to use to our ability and kind of just promote ourselves and what we do and kind of what we believe in. And it's like a little snippet of like who we are outside of lacrosse. Like it shows what we like to do. Like we're more than just lacrosse players at the end of the day.
I know your freshman year, there wasn't a collective for women's lacrosse or any women's sport at that matter. It was only men's football, basketball, and then men's lacrosse, even though you guys have probably been the most successful program, or one of, if not one of the top at Maryland. How frustrating was that in terms of, I know it changed this year, but did you guys have any conversations with administrators or anything like that about like, hey, like, we need representation too on that side?
Mhm. I think there was definitely conversations probably had. I mean, I was only a freshman last year, so I really kind of came in not knowing a lot. I was kind of just like kind of flying under the radar, got to get things done. Um, but I think the university has done such a good job now, kind of like representing the university. But I also think like our Maryland athletic director does a great job of like always owning like Maryland is about Maryland's women's lacrosse program. Like we're always like everyone backs us up. Like we're like I feel like everyone knows who we are, and I feel like that's why we don't get caught up in all of that because everyone knows like how like prestigious this program is. So it's like we don't need that outside validation because we know our community within like kind of respects us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's great, and I just the outside validation is a little different than players getting paid too. Like that's the only question I have is in terms of, I think there's a respect level, but when the tangible money or opportunities aren't equal, I know you were a freshman, but were teammates at all like, because they changed it, right? And
Yeah.
obviously there were probably reasons for that change. Did older teammates ever like talk with you about that, or was that never really a conversation?
I think at the end of the day, we're lacrosse athletes. Like, but this is kind of my point of view from it is that, like, yeah, it's great to like make a little money from playing lacrosse, but like we came here to play lacrosse. Like, there's times where before, like, you didn't get anything for playing, like, and I get we're lower, like, revenue generating sport, but I think it's like at the end of the day, you need to be able to you need to remember what you're doing. And it's not about money. And I think that's when that switch gets flipped for a lot of, especially like these younger generations, where it's like these NIL deals are kind of influencing where these kids go. It's also, you got to remember that you have to love what you're doing and love the people you're around. And there was not one conversation within our team where it was like, well, they're getting paid this amount of money or X amount of money. But we didn't talk about that because we love being with each other every single day. And it was like, okay, who cares about the money? Like, I bet you, like, you know what, they're making all this money, but maybe they don't have the culture that we have because we don't complain about the money. Like, there's a lot of, especially in like the like higher revenue generating sports, like basketball players not playing in games because they aren't getting paid a certain amount of money. Like, at the end of the day, you're going to the school you went to play basketball, not because you're getting paid a certain amount of money. And I think that's where like athletes now need to, I feel like, unwrap their brains around this NIL thing, because it's like you have to play the sport that you like. You need to play the sport, and you're getting wrapped up in the money where that shouldn't. For at least personally, that's what like my standpoint on it is.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely kind of a fair perspective on it. And the other thing you mentioned about NIL was it kind of lets you show and lets the other athletes show what they're interested, not just on the field. You mentioned that for the Under Armour thing. What kind of things are those for you? Like off of the cross field, what are you up to? What are you doing when you're not thinking about the game?
Yeah, I'm a big family person, so I love spending time with my family, love spending time with my dogs. I just like being outdoors with my family, just kind of like being where I am, just being like a big nature girl. Love going on hikes, love going on walks, just like being like anywhere I'm not in the sports, kind of just like it's a relaxing moment, even though I love lacrosse, but like at the end of the day, we're much bigger than the sport. But that's kind of just like me. I like to be just kind of do whatever I want.
I saw one of those was in a Len Bias jersey at was that at Infinity or was that at the Pavilion? Or
That
no?
was at the Pavilion. We were
Okay.
playing Turp Olympics, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna show up in the jersey and play it. And I was like, you know what, I might be a terrible basketball player. I've never played basketball in my life, but try it out.
I like it. I like it. How did you kind of come about playing with Team USA? What was that process, and how was it like representing the country?
It's always an honor to wear the red, white, and blue, no matter in what aspect. So from a young age, I obviously always knew that I wanted to play for USA. So kind of what started that is I played with the U16 training like development like program, and then tried out for the U18 team, made that as well. And then this year I'm on the U20 training team to go to Hong Kong. And I think at the end of the day, it's like I've already said, it's always an honor to play, but I think knowing like where you came from and knowing that like everyone behind you supports you and just believing in yourself, like I think that's like the biggest thing with that stuff.
You mentioned kind of getting to travel to Hong Kong, then, but also you kind of make relationships, I guess, I would guess with other people who are on other teams across the country. What's that kind of like when you're all season probably playing against these people, and then you guys got to all go to play together? Is it difficult, kind of quickly kind of adapting different play styles?
I wouldn't say it's difficult to adapt to their playing style. I think it's funny to see when you go to these things. It's like, oh, like that girl's like that, but then you're like, wait, she's awesome. She's so sweet. Like she's so nice. It's kind of like you always learn about that. You're like, oh wait, like that's not like who I thought she kind of was. And it's also nice just to like all these girls in this like that team are talented, and being able to just have all those girls on one field together. It's like honestly it's an amazing thing to watch. Like being able to just like sit there. I remember at practice, like I'm standing there and I'm like, wow, like this is just amazing thing to be a part of, to watch so much talent on one field it was crazy.
You mentioned it earlier, and I just want to follow up to kind of clarify, right? Like you mentioned the Turp Olympics. For people who don't know what that are, I know it's kind of like a very big team building thing. Can you explain what that is, and then just like
Yeah. So
yeah, go for it.
basically, we have a thing called Terp Olympics, and then at the beginning of our fall season, it's kind of like what we do during the week as like one of our days, and we basically get split into teams, red and white, and we play like a whole bunch of games. Like we do beach volleyball, we do basketball, we do dodgeball, and we do like we'll scrimmage like lacrosse games where like throughout practices we'll make like little things like a competition, be like, oh, this is a Terp Olympic point. And then so it's just basically just like to stay competitive during the fall. I think it's really hard in the fall, like just like have that competitive edge because you know what, like you're not playing like you're playing fall ball games, but like you're not playing like you don't have a game every week to like kind of look forward to get that competitive edge. So it keeps that competitive like edge in like our team. So it's a lot of fun and it's literally we all like maybe we get a little too competitive with it sometimes, but it's so much fun.
One thing I wanted to ask kind of to wrap up is I read an article last year about your guys' like light board.
Mhm.
Can you kind of explain that, what it is, who's some of the top performers and what it does for your guys' reaction time and such?
Yeah, so it's called Dynavision. Last year we had it in the VTH, like in the lift room where like baseball is. So we got to use that for game days and it helps with the reaction time. So like a lot of the goalies use it, a lot of our defenders use it. And like our top contender is obviously Emily Sterling. Like she like you can obviously tell in the goal it works a lot for her and like her score is insane. But like a lot of our defenders use it. So it's really beneficial. Like I use it sometimes but I'm so bad at it that I get frustrated with it. I have to step away from it because I'll be there for hours. But it's definitely like having it in our facility now and be able to just like walk into our training room and see it there. It's definitely like a motivation for all of us to get better. Like we see the scores and we get competitive with it. And it's like another edge of our game that we can control that. Like we can control like going in there and making ourselves better. And I think it's an awesome addition.
So to kind of bring it back to this season, going into the season, when you look at the schedule and you see that pretty much every team that you face is, if they're not ranked, they're one of the best teams in the country. What's that kind of like, and how do you kind of focus in on one game at a time, knowing you kind of have a mountain in front of you?
I think that's what makes lacrosse so much fun. I think knowing that every game you play, everyone wants to beat you, and like knowing that no team is a cupcake walk, like every team out there is going to be a competitive game and at the end of the day could beat you. You never know what happens. Like we've all seen it this year with college lacrosse, like anything could happen. So I think just keeping our like mindset on each game and not getting ahead. We kind of like this year we've embodied like the phrase of like we're going 1-0 today. Not 1-0 because that's going to help us for the rankings or that's going to help us for our schedule or for the NCAAs. Like we're going 1-0 today and we're going to do what we can on the field today to make it the best for us. Like winning the little things, making sure that we're attacking, we're being competitive on that game and we're not overlooking maybe that team because you know what, maybe we're playing a harder game next week, but like we have to stay present in the moment. I think that's kind of been our goal for this year with our schedule.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And another part of it was last year, guys obviously didn't host NCAA first, second round game. Was that a motivation coming into the season?
Most definitely. I think anywhere you go, anyone talks about it, like you want to host an NCAA first and second round. Like having that home field advantage is nothing like you can't beat that, but also having that home field advantage at the University of Maryland, like the Plex is somewhere like it's a very hard place to play at. Like it's so awesome and like being able to bring competition here, like it's kind of like a once in a lifetime thing.
And then just really briefly, one unit, player, or thing that you think gives this team a chance to win a national championship, what would you say who it would be?
At the end of the day, I'll take everyone on our team that's going to win a national championship because it takes everyone. It's not one individual person, not one individual unit. It takes all 36 players we have on our team to win, no matter if you play, no matter if you don't play, like no matter if you're hurt, like it takes everyone. It takes a village and it takes a coaching staff. It takes our trainers. It takes our strength conditioning coach. Like it absolutely takes everyone. And that at the end of the day is going to be what wins us a national championship, not because one person puts the team on their back, because at the end of the day, there's like no I in team, like is like as like cheesy as that phrase is, but like we really have to do it as together. And I think like that's what we've really embodied this year is that doing this together doing it together as a team, like maybe one day one person's off, but someone else is picking up their, like, I don't want to say their slack, but is picking up their weight and knowing, like, I have you today. Like, you do what you need to do to get through this game. Like, we have you. And I think that's what's made us different this year, is that we've kind of worked together when things are going rough. And I think last year it was hard for us to kind of get out of that rut when things were going rough for us. But this year we've kind of like really embodied that family like aspect and really just banded together.
And that was Kori Edmondson talking about this Maryland women's lacrosse team that when we interviewed her, guys, looked a lot better than what they do now. Another loss for the women Terps. Tough one, dropping it to Penn State. This team is kind of, they're losing close games. They're winning. They won close games earlier in the year. I am inclined to believe that I think they're going to figure it out, but I've been more optimistic on this team all year, per se. So I don't want to be, too in depth into it in terms of my optimism. So I do think it's safe to say that they're maybe not that top 3, top 5 caliber national team that will be thought during that, mid-season stretch per se.
Yeah, I mean, they reached the number 1 ranking in the country, which I don't think too many people thought would be the case going into the season. I asked her the question in the interview about if hosting a NCAA tournament game was motivation, and obviously she said it was, but looking at the standings, or the rankings rather, right now, it's possible that Maryland will not host a game in the NCAA tournament. Currently ranked 8th through Inside Lacrosse, obviously different rankings. There'll be different rankings by the time the tournament rolls around, a couple weeks until then. But the next few weeks are really important for Maryland women's lacrosse if they want to be one of those top 8 teams and host a game. Going back, you mentioned it, Sam, the loss against Penn State, really a game that if you watched the first half, you thought Maryland would probably win by 10 or so, but the second half was a completely different story, allowed 6 third quarter goals, and it just came down to really, uncharacteristic free position defense. So Maryland had a chance to win a share of the Big Ten title if they had won that game. Now the winner of the Big Ten will be an outright winner, and it'll either be Northwestern or Michigan. Maryland beat Michigan. Maryland lost to Northwestern. So that game would have had a lot of implications for Maryland. But now, they're not going to get the first seed. It'll be one of those 2 teams, and have a non-conference game against Princeton on Wednesday. That game, you'd think doesn't really mean that much because it doesn't have any impact on the Big Ten tournament. But hey, if they want to host a game in the NCAA tournament, that's a huge win. And it's honestly maybe a must win if they want to do that. Obviously, the Big Ten tournament is going to have big implications on if they host a game, but dropping a game to Princeton would be a really bad look to host a game and be one of the top 8 teams. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I do think that the Penn State game was a little uncharacteristic too, because Emily Sterling, who usually is so good, was not that. She gave up. She only had 4 stops. She's one of the best goalies in the country. And part of that was because Maryland kept giving up, like you said, free position goals, right? They're allowing, all these open looks at the net. But for her to have that much of a struggle, I thought was surprising. And I think I would be more inclined to believe she'll get back to that performance. I do think that the offense has maybe dropped off a little from where they were at the beginning of the year. They're not that caliber of a team. They started out the Penn State game really hot, but they scored 1 goal over the next 20 minutes of play. So, and that's kind of been a continuous theme I think we've seen a little bit with this squad. So I think the Princeton game, it's a good get right spot, I think, before the Big Ten tournament. Definitely want to win that one to get some momentum going. But like you said, huge missed opportunity to lose out on a, clinching of a top 2 seed and potentially put yourself in peril of hosting. So I think the women's lacrosse team, I don't want to overreact because they're losing very tight games, and I still think they could turn it around. But I am a bit concerned about their ceiling per se with the squad. And I think the same can be said for the men's team. Now, the men's team is winning, but the results, I don't want to discredit winning, and I'm not trying to do that, but I just don't know if this team has the firepower that's needed to compete, at the national level that Maryland expects to compete at. And maybe that's a conclusive statement, but I don't know. Another, low scoring win against Rutgers. The defense was dominant though, Brendan. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, coming into that game once again, you knew that Maryland was gonna rely on the defense, and they absolutely did, only allowing 6 goals. But I mean, the offense for Maryland in that game was pretty ugly. I don't think they had a shot until 6 or 7 minutes into the game. But hey, at the end of the day, they get the job done. They score 11 goals and they win by 5. Like that's a pretty big win at a good point in the season. Yeah, the wins aren't pretty, but who cares? And so they have a chance to win the Big Ten title against Johns Hopkins. Huge rivalry game. That game is going to be extremely difficult. Johns Hopkins is coming into the game on Saturday, having just won back-to-back games in overtime. They haven't played a non-close game this year that they've lost. They've lost 2 games, but I believe 2 or 3 games, and they've all been by 1 goal. So Johns Hopkins is, no matter what happens if Maryland wins, I'd expect it to be an extremely close game. But Johns Hopkins has looked pretty strong all year, and if Maryland wins, it's going to have to probably hold Johns Hopkins to under 8 or 9 goals.
I think this team is very similar to last year's team in a way, in that offensive inconsistency is plaguing them. They haven't tallied, and this is from the Diamondback, they haven't tallied 30% just 4 times. They've only tallied a 30% shooting rate just 4 times this season. And that's happened in back-to-back contests. So they're not getting a ton of shots. They're converting a little better recently. So now you just have to pair those two together, and that would make for a more competitive outing. But I would expect Johns Hopkins I think they're going to win, and I think it's not going to be necessarily close. I think they look really, really good, and the Big Ten is obviously a slaughterhouse, and Johns Hopkins is near the top of that. So I'd expect a competitive game in the beginning, but they're going to run away with the rivalry win at the end, I would guess.
Yeah, I agree with you on that prediction, but in terms of season outlook, if you only allow 6, 7, 8 goals, you give your offense a chance to win that game. And I think if you can't score 10 goals to win a game, then really you probably didn't deserve to win that game at all. So basically going into every game, Maryland knows it has a chance, just relying on defense and goalkeeping. So that's, obviously a huge positive, but at some point you can only do so much with that.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the recipe. The strong defense, poor offense, way different for the baseball team. Completely the opposite, in fact.
Welcome to the episode, Mike.
Thanks for joining us. Poor pitching has been a theme all year, and it snowballed this weekend. Our good friend was camping. 2/3 of the podcast was completely gone for the weekend, but we did check back in after. Mike, maybe to the dismay of Terp baseball fans, they just wish that weekend didn't happen. What the heck is going on with the baseball program?
It's what we've been talking about the past few weeks now. Poor pitching, sporadic offense. They're 3-8 in their last 11 games. In that span, they have a 9.51 ERA. I don't think that's anything that Terps fans would have hoped for going into it. They're batting .254, which is not great, and they're only averaging about 5 runs a game, which is below what they were averaging last year. And it's been a completely downward spiral for them. To open up the year with the momentum they had, big win over Pitt early on. They had the series win over Georgia Southern to open the year. They had those 2 comeback wins in the Big Ten opening series against Michigan State, but ever since then, it's been snowballing. I think the team's roster deficiencies are really coming out now. They never had a true solid starter who had played in Big Ten play before. Logan Coaster played at George Washington last year. Kenny Lipman was just a middle reliever last year, and before that, he played at D3 Denison. They never really had a guy on that pitching staff with the experience to lead the group. And I think that's showing right now. And then on the flip side, they've lost so much offensive talent since last season. No Matt Shaw, no Nick LaRusso, no Luke Schliger. Like, these are big-time names that were drafted into the league, and now they don't have that. And I think some of the holes are starting to pile up.
Yeah, I agree, but I also want to push back a little on the narrative that, they lost a lot of talent. I'm not saying that they didn't, but the talk before the year was how talented this offense was going to be, and I think it's still showing up, right? But what do you think is the biggest difference between preseason expectations for this offense and what's actually happening recently? Because we know the pitching has just, the depth is bad, and the guys they're relying on at the front line aren't necessarily the caliber of players that you want to. But I'm more worried or not worried, but more concerned and curious about the offense.
I think catcher and the DH position are two positions that they are really lacking right now in some of that offensive power. You think about they had Ian Petrutz last year. He's now at Alabama. They had Luke Schliger behind the plate. He's now gone. He was drafted. And the guys they've replaced them with haven't really been up to par. Alex Clarko was hyped up going into the year. He's only batting .222 in that DH catcher role. He has 4 home runs. I don't think he's hit a single one the past 2 weekends. Devin Russell was a guy everybody was saying had a great fall, was going to be a star this season. He's batting .181 right now. Like they just don't have the same offensive group that they had last year that was helping them pump out these wins. For example, Saturday against Northwestern, they scored a grand total of 1 run. Friday against Northwestern, they were leading 4-0. In the second half of that game, they were terrible. They struggled to generate offense, and I think yeah, we can keep blaming it on the lost talent, but I just think it comes down to they just don't have the same group. The Hakopian brothers are really the only consistent ones who give you production game in and game out, and it shows in the numbers too. They're the only ones on the team batting over 300.
I hate to ask this question, but I think I have to. You think the main losses from last year's team, I would assume you would say, are people that went professional and not people that transferred. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. I mean, the only one who did transfer, who I think, well, there's a couple, but I think Ian Petrutz really, they're missing him in that DH spot. He was a guy who they could rely on last year to hit a couple home runs. He had a really good start to the season last year too.
Yeah, and I think that, as we've talked about, the pitching, I think we all expected to not be great, right? It wasn't great last year, if I'm correct, Mike. Like, the ERA numbers are pretty similar. I think it's this year they don't have a frontline starter like Savicle. Nick Dean at least is a high caliber pitcher. He maybe the numbers necessarily didn't back it up, but he was a solid guy. Kyle McCoy, I think, would have stepped into that. He would be their number one, if I'm correct. We knew that wasn't going to be there. I think the concerning part of this season is Swope's calling card, his offense. That's what he's supposed to produce. I'm not saying they've been bad, but it's not carrying them to wins how it did last year, at least in this part of the season.
Yeah, they definitely disappointed. And to go back to the pitching for 1 second, I think last year when you have 5 guys drafted into the league and the pitching staff is still terrible, I think that was a coaching problem. They got rid of the old pitching coach. They brought in a new one. And I don't think it's a coaching problem this year. I just don't think they have the guys to sustain it for a long season because both Coaster and Littman had good starts. They just haven't been able to sustain it. Offensively, it's definitely concerning that that's Swope's calling card, and the home runs are down this year. He's even brought that up. And then you just have guys struggling from the plate. Like, I keep going back to it, but Alex Clarko and Devin Russell, those were supposed to be 2 guys with big roles on this offense this year who, you look at the numbers, they're on the bottom of the sheet right now.
Let's not leave out Elijah Lambros either. I think he was expected to take a big leap, and he hasn't been great either.
He's been a little disappointed, but he's top 4 on the team in RBIs, so he brings in runs. He might not be getting on base as much as he was last year, but he's still producing somewhat.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. I just think the way you talked about him and the way people talked about him, it seemed like he was blossoming into that kind of 5-tool, top of the line player in center field. And I don't know if he's reached that point yet. I think he's a solid option, but he's not a star. And, I think that stars are, they're still plentiful on the baseball roster, not as much as last year. Softball team probably has 1 star we can talk about. And we talk about her every week, Courtney Weish. But even she hasn't been able to save the Terps recently. They've lost 7 straight, kind of spiraling, I think. Other than Weish, the pitching has not been great. Northwestern is a really good team, but they were swept by them. 2-1 was the latest result on Sunday, and they dropped to 4-10 in the Big Ten. and 17-24 overall. So not much to talk about. I mean, Courtney Weiss is an excellent pitcher. She threw 130 pitches in 6 innings of work, which is an insane stat. But yeah, it just seems like the softball team, I think we've reached that point of baseball and softball season where it's in like the dog days of August and June, but it's not June or August. So that's kind of where we're at right now on the diamond.
Yeah, in terms of the softball season, it seems like we sit here and we say the same thing every week. They played a bunch of close games. Courtney Weiss played awesome, and that's pretty much it at this point, Sam. What do you think for the last kind of month or so of the season? If you were Lauren Karn, what would you say is the goal?
Oh man, I never know with losing teams because like coaches aren't going to just be like, all right, guys, let's go out there and play hard. Like, right. Like they want to win. I think it's getting more young players looks. I don't know the full extent of the roster, but if you have young talent, continue to get them looks. I think Courtney Weiss is leaving after this year, so just letting her continue her dominance and just hoping you can pick up a couple, maybe a Big Ten series would be a good start. Winning a series, something like that, to just kind of get things back on track and have something you can point to in your first year.
Absolutely. Maybe you got a little bit of future there in coaching, and I made you tap into some of those baseball days for you. So hopefully that
yeah,
some good thoughts.
We don't got to talk about winning with my baseball days.
Exactly. Just to touch on some other news, the biggest story of this past weekend was obviously golf, but there's a big golf tournament next weekend as well, and that's the Women's Big Ten Championships. And if you take a look at the rankings, the full rankings in the NCAA, Maryland is ranked 6th in the Big Ten in those rankings. So possibility for them to make some noise. Obviously, we had Patricia Makova on last year. If you want a little bit of an insight on her, go check out that interview from a year ago. But, I'll give you some recap after this weekend on how Maryland women's golf fared in the Big Ten Championships.
Are we going to have another Scotty Scheffler or Rose Zhao, I think, from Stanford in the mix here, or is that not happening?
I don't think they're going to come on the podcast. Maybe we'll see if they, we'll see how their performance goes in the Big Ten tournament. Possibly could get another member of the women's golf team on, but maybe. We'll have to see.
That was a bar, though. I want to let you know about the golf tournament. I'm sure our audience will enjoy that.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I know. I was tuned into the Masters, but I was also tuned into the transfer portal, like everybody is nowadays. Let's talk men's and women's basketball transfer portal. Starting with the men's, the biggest news, I guess, would be from today at least that Jamie Kaiser is going to Butler. Whatever. And then Maddie Traore transferred out of Maryland. Kind of surprising, but not ridiculously surprising. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
To quote Brendan Weissel, whatever. I don't not to belittle Maddie Traore and I mean he's a talented prospect, I guess. I mean he has that height and athleticism combo, but Mike, it seems like Willard's probably more focused on adding a more ready player in the transfer portal, potentially someone who has some experience in College Park. Whoa. What do we say about Mr. Martinez potentially reuniting with Maryland?
Yeah, if you think about his scoring, his shooting, that's something that the team really missed the past season. And at the beginning of this transfer cycle, it sounded like there was no shot Martinez would come back. But if you think about what he could bring to his team, I would think that Kevin Willard and the coaching staff would welcome him back with open arms, despite what happened last offseason.
Yeah, and I would think the same thing, but the idea that Willard maybe is upset about how Martinez left. I don't know if you guys can recall from last season, but Martinez left on the last day of the transfer portal opening. So I think Willard didn't expect that. Martinez definitely surprised him. And I think there might be not bad blood, but there might be some lingering feelings over there. Brendan, what do you think Kevin Willard should do?
Okay, it's Martinez's 3rd time in the portal, but what people, I guess, forget is that he actually spent 2 seasons at Maryland. One of those seasons wasn't under Coach Willard. It was, Turgeon recruited him, and then obviously Turgeon left. But I think it's important to remember that he actually was at Maryland for 2 years and decided to stay around. So Kevin Willard does have experience recruiting him because he had to recruit him to stay at Maryland a couple seasons ago. With that in mind, he did this program pretty dirty, and for some reason, people still seem to have a big love for him just because he played so dang well this season. If he doesn't have an incredible season, at Utah State, I don't think people care about having him back. I don't think he was really a person within the Maryland basketball team that people are going to remember and love. He had an impact, 2 years ago, whatever, but
You loved him.
I thought he was great, but yeah, no, I mean, I thought he was a fun person to watch, and he was very helpful to the Maryland team, but he wasn't. Yeah, he had good pregame dunks. I mean, here's the thing. All right, if you watch the first 5 minutes of the Purdue-Utah State game in the tournament, Ian Martinez looked like one of the top 5 players in the country. And so I think Kevin Willard would be silly to not welcome him back. But hey, it's coaches in college basketball, and I would completely understand if he holds a grudge. That's like, you screwed us over for this past season. And that's a fact. So it's really hard to know. I don't think it's going to end up at Maryland.
I wonder if it's less of a grudge and more like, I don't know if you're a fit for our culture. I guess would probably be more along the lines of what he's thinking. Like, you left us before, and now you're going to come back per se. I mean, like, it just doesn't seem to like maybe fit into what Willard wants per se, in that type of like culture, building that type of thing, because and not to say that Ian Martinez wouldn't be an excellent player at Maryland, but Ian Martinez, this will also be, if he doesn't go to Maryland, his 4th team in 5 years. So he clearly is not someone who's found a consistent home. And I don't know. I think I would take him, but I would have to have him explain why he's coming back. That's what I would say.
I have to wonder, because you got to look at it full picture, if him returning to Maryland helps him academically at all. I assume he's graduating from Utah State this year, but I have no idea. That's something I'd obviously and someone would have to look into, but he definitely, probably built up 2 years of credits at Maryland. So yeah, I have no idea if he'd be a grad. That's something beyond my my level of knowledge about Ian Martinez, but it's definitely something to think about. Do academics play a role? But I doubt it.
There's some other guys too. Bryce Pope is potentially coming, and he's a really, really solid player, great shooter. So I think they're clearly looking for a wing, because I think the 4 slots, Mike, would you agree? It's Gillespie, DHS, Portal, Queen, Juju.
Yeah, definitely.
And then
you can have what's his name? You can have Rodney Rice coming off the bench, and there's your bench depth too if the Martinez transfer. So
yeah,
I see no reason why Willard and the staff should not welcome him back. I think that would be a huge addition to the depth of the team.
It's not like Willard also really has a bunch of like leeway to play with. Like, oh, we have this great culture. Like, you can't come back. Like, the guy's coming off a horrible season. So he's not really like in the options to be playing pick and choose here.
I will say I watched an interview with Martinez before the Purdue game in the locker room. It was like during the practice before the Purdue game in March Madness this past year. And, he spoke pretty vaguely about Maryland and his time. And, he was asked a question about playing against Zach Edey in the Big Ten, obviously. And he didn't really give super direct answers about, Maryland and who he still is friends with here and how much he'd really been communicating with guys here. So obviously a lot of turnover on the team, but I think that's something of note, that he didn't speak super highly of Maryland in that interview. And obviously that's just one example, but, it's what comes to mind.
Yeah, well, we've talked enough about a guy who might not even come here, so let's end the Ian Martinez discussion and move on to someone who did leave and is not coming back. That's Howard Demboya from the women's basketball team. Another transfer exit. Brendan Free shouldn't even bring in recruiting classes. They just don't stay anymore. I mean, that's 2 years in a row where it's been one freshman who stayed from each. Granted, they've been the best freshmen, but still. We talked about Riley Nelson's departure. Now we're on to Howard Demboya. Real quick, Mike, because we've talked a lot about the transfer portal. Do you think that loss really means anything? I mean, Demboya didn't play much, but they don't really have a ton of, forward depth.
I'm not sure Hollow was going to play again next year. I mean, I think Freese and the coaching staff viewed her more as a long-term project, a prospect they could work with. Certainly it hurts with depth, and certainly at the center position, because they still don't have anybody to take that post in the paint. But I think it's more concerning for this habit of young players leaving Maryland and then going to other Power 5 schools. I don't think Demboya's going to go to a Power 5 school, but it wouldn't surprise me if another one picks her up and views her as a prospect they can work with.
Most definitely, and I agree with you, Mike. I think probably next year, but it would have been a couple years away.
I kind of view Hawa and Maddie from the men's side as kind of the same player. In order for them to get really good at college basketball, they have to play in a lot of games. So them staying at Power 5 schools where they're not going to get extended minutes, it makes sense for those people to transfer. But obviously looking at it from a whole perspective, a good coach would like to think they can keep that player, develop them more in practice, and get them to that point where they can be an impact on the floor. But it's obvious from both sides that that's not going to happen. And the way college basketball is played, I'm sure they feel they just need to actually be on the court to develop, and you have to respect that.
Definitely. I think this one less so than the others. I've thought about it recently. I don't hate that she left for Maryland, but I do think that, guys, they have 5 scholarship players, right? Like they need bodies. Like it's not really like, oh, they should just be asking people to leave. So I don't think that's what happened. That's not what I've heard happened. I just think that she was ready to go see more time, I think. But that'll wrap up all the Maryland sports recaps from the weekend. We have a Maryland basketball related terrific terp potentially, but not maybe the Williams that you're thinking of. Take it away, B.
This week's terrific terp is a legendary Williams from Maryland basketball. No, not Walt Williams, but Buck Williams. He grew up in North Carolina, and instead of playing in one of those great ACC schools, he came to the University of Maryland. He immediately made an impact, winning ACC Rookie of the Year while leading the conference in rebounds. After his sophomore year, he was selected to compete in the 1980 Olympic Games, but was never able to compete due to the U.S. boycott. He earned first-team All-American honors as a junior and decided to leave after that year to enter the NBA draft. After being selected 3rd overall by the New Jersey Nets, he continued to have success and once again won NBA Rookie of the Year. He spent 8 seasons in New Jersey, including 3 All-Star Game appearances, before heading to the Portland Trail Blazers, where he then spent 7 seasons. To finish his career, he came back to the Mid-Atlantic, where he spent 2 seasons on the Knicks. Williams was successful in helping his teams reach the playoffs. He reached them 13 times. He had 2 finals appearances, but was never able to win a championship. In the NBA, he was a successful scorer and rebounder. He was the 7th player all-time to have more than 16,000 points and 13,000 rebounds. At the end of his career, Williams served as the president of the NBA Players Association, and his number 52 still hangs in the rafters for the Nets. He's a part of the Maryland Athletics Hall of Fame, and he is this week's terrific terp.
The best honor he could have received. Every time one of these terrific terps get named, they really should just notch it onto like whatever plaque or banner or whatever they have. Under the Shell's terrific terp, and that should be the front line and center of any sort of content that they put out.
You are way too kind.
Just like we should be the front line and center for any Maryland podcast related news that you can find. You can get us at Apple, Spotify, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all the places you want to see and hear about terp-related news in Maryland athletics. Because it's spring season, we're getting right to lacrosse postseason play. Baseball postseason, maybe not as a sure thing as we once thought, but we'll have all the coverage of it. 3 great student journalists here at Under the Shell. You can listen to us, read about us at Testudo Times as well. So all those cool channels that we got. But from us, have a great rest of your night. Go enjoy a nice round of golf if you do. And if not, you're missing out. Have a good one.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell podcast. Nobody does it better.